My parents threw me out pregnant, calling me a liar and a disgrace to the family name. What they didn't know was that I was carrying twins, the heirs to $1 billion empire, the father, the man they'd refused to meet. While I built my life from nothing, their perfect world started crumbling. Karma was coming. When they lost everything, they came crawling back. But it was too late. This is how I went from disowned daughter to untouchable queen. Growing up in the Martinez household felt like living inside a museum. Everything had to be perfect. My father, Richard Martinez, was one of Chicago's most respected attorneys, the kind of man who made headlines for winning impossible cases. My mother, Dr. Patricia Martinez, ran the city's premier pediatric practice. Together, they were Chicago's power couple, the family everyone admired from the outside. I was their crown jewel. Jennifer Martinez, valedictorian, Harvard scholarship recipient, the daughter who made them shine even brighter at charity galas and country club dinners. But perfection came with a price tag I didn't understand until it was too late. Every A- was met with disappointment. Every achievement was followed by, "But you could do better." Love in the Martinez house wasn't unconditional. It was earned, one perfect report card at a time. The pressure was suffocating, but I didn't know any different. I thought all families operated like ours, where image mattered more than feelings, where success was the only acceptable outcome. I spent my teenage years chasing their approval, believing that if I just tried harder, if I just achieved more, they'd finally be proud of me without conditions attached. The first crack in my perfect world appeared at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala last spring. I was there representing Harvard's pre-med program, networking with potential mentors like the good daughter I'd been trained to be. That's when I saw him across the room. Alexander Chen, 28 years old, confident in a way that didn't feel arrogant, talking to a group of doctors about his latest venture. I'd heard of him, of course. Everyone in Chicago had. The tech entrepreneur who'd built his fortune from nothing, creating apps that revolutionized healthcare communication. New money, my parents would sniff dismissively. But when our eyes met across that crowded ballroom, something shifted inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt seen by someone who wasn't calculating my worth based on my achievements. Our conversation started innocently enough. He was genuinely interested in my medical school plans, asked thoughtful questions about my research. But there was something else there, an electric current that made my heart race in ways I'd never experienced. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation, despite knowing my parents were watching from across the room. The drive home that night was tense. My mother's disapproval radiated from the passenger seat while my father gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "Alexander Chen," my father finally said, his voice dripping with disdain. "New money, no class, no breeding. You can do better, Jennifer." But I didn't want to do better. For the first time in my life, I wanted something that was mine, something that made me feel alive instead of just accomplished. Alexander and I started seeing each other in secret, stolen dinners at restaurants across town, long walks through Lincoln Park where no one from my parents' social circle would see us. He was different from anyone I'd ever known. While my world revolved around appearances and achievements, his was built on genuine passion for making a difference. He'd grown up poor, worked his way through college, understood struggle in ways my privileged life had never taught me. With him, I didn't have to be perfect. I could just be Jennifer. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially in a family where control masqueraded as love. 3 months into our relationship, my mother found a photo of us together on my phone. The explosion that followed shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family. "You're embarrassing us," my mother hissed, her perfectly composed facade cracking for the first time I could remember. "Dating beneath your station like some common girl with no sense of propriety." My father was worse. His disappointment cut deeper than any anger could have. "We've given you everything, Jennifer. The best education, the best opportunities, and this is how you repay us? By throwing yourself away on someone who'll never be accepted in our world?" They demanded I stop seeing him immediately. When I refused, the psychological warfare began. They monitored my phone, limited my freedom, scheduled activities designed to keep me away from Alexander. Family dinners became interrogations. Every conversation was a minefield where one wrong word could trigger another lecture about responsibility and family reputation. The worst part was how they made me question myself. "You're being naive," they'd say. "He's using you for your connections. Men like him always are." They planted seeds of doubt that grew in the quiet moments when Alexander was busy with work, when I was alone with my thoughts and their voices echoing in my head. I started lying to both sides, lying to my parents about where I was going, lying to Alexander about why I couldn't see him certain nights. The stress was eating me alive, but I couldn't bear the thought of losing either him or my family. I was 23 years old and still terrified of disappointing the people who'd raised me to believe their approval was everything. The psychological pressure intensified when my parents recruited my extended family to their cause. Suddenly, every family gathering became an intervention. Aunts and uncles who'd barely spoken to me before had opinions about my relationship. Cousins who'd always treated me as the golden child now looked at me with pity and judgment. "You're throwing your life away," my Aunt Carol said during Sunday dinner, her voice syrupy with false concern. "A girl with your potential shouldn't settle for someone so unsuitable." Even my grandmother, the one person I thought might understand, shook her head sadly when the topic came up. "In my day, we knew the importance of marrying within our class," she said, her words hitting me like physical blows. I felt like I was drowning in their expectations, gasping for air in a world where love had to be approved by committee. The only time I could breathe was when I was with Alexander, but even those moments were tainted by the constant fear of being discovered, of facing another confrontation when I got home. My health started suffering. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, jumped at every unexpected phone call. Alexander noticed, tried to get me to talk about what was wrong, but how could I explain that my family was systematically destroying my sense of self? How could I admit that sometimes, in my weakest moments, I wondered if they were right about him, about us, about everything? The breaking point came 6 months into our relationship. I was late, 2 weeks late to be exact, and the pregnancy test I'd hidden in my dorm room confirmed what my body had been trying to tell me. 2 pink lines that changed everything. I stared at that test for what felt like hours, my mind reeling between terror and an unexpected flutter of joy. I was pregnant with Alexander's children, twins as I'd later discover. Part of me was scared, of course. We were young, our relationship was already under siege, and I had no idea how either of our families would react. But another part of me, a part I'd been suppressing for months, was quietly thrilled. These babies would be mine and Alexander's, a love that couldn't be controlled or manipulated by my parents' expectations. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I had something that was completely mine. I knew I had to tell Alexander first, but before I could arrange to see him, my parents cornered me with what they called evidence of his infidelity. Photos of him at restaurants with other women, screenshots of text messages that could be interpreted as romantic. Their private investigator had been thorough. "We tried to protect you," my mother said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But you wouldn't listen. Now you can see him for what he really is." Looking at those photos, my pregnant hormones and existing stress made it impossible to think clearly. The women in the pictures looked sophisticated, successful, the kind of women who belonged in Alexander's world without apology. My parents' voices blended together in a chorus of, "We told you so," and "You're better off without him." In that moment of weakness, surrounded by their certainty and my own spiraling emotions, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I believed them. I convinced myself that Alexander had been playing me all along, that my parents were right about everything. The pregnancy felt like a trap instead of a gift, evidence of my own stupidity rather than the beginning of something beautiful. That night, when my parents presented their ultimatum, "Choose him or choose your family," I was already beaten down enough to consider their demands, but I hadn't told them about the pregnancy yet. Part of me hoped that news of grandchildren might soften their stance, might make them realize that this wasn't just about me anymore. I was wrong. When I finally worked up the courage to tell them about the twins I was carrying, their reaction was even worse than I'd feared. The disappointment on their faces transformed into something I'd never seen before: complete and total rejection. "Pregnant," my father repeated, the word dripping with disgust. "Pregnant by that nobody. Do you understand what you've done to this family's reputation?" My mother's response was even more devastating. "We raised you better than this, Jennifer. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By getting yourself knocked up like some teenager with no self-control?" They didn't want to hear about my feelings for Alexander, didn't care that these babies were their grandchildren. All they could see was the scandal, the embarrassment, the way this would look to their social circle. In their eyes, I had gone from crown jewel to family shame in the span of a single conversation. The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday night I'll never forget. I'd been staying at my parents' house, hoping against hope that we could work things out, that family love would eventually triumph over their obsession with appearances. I was wrong. My father stood in the foyer, my suitcases already packed and waiting by the door. My mother sat on the living room couch, her face composed but her eyes cold as winter. They'd made their decision. "Pack your things," my father said, his voice eerily calm. "You're no longer welcome in this house." "Dad, please," I started, but he held up a hand to silence me. "You made your choice when you decided to disgrace this family. We cannot and will not support this mistake you've made." My mother finally spoke, her words carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. "You're an embarrassment, Jennifer. After everything we've invested in you, everything we've given you, this is how you repay us. We're ashamed to call you our daughter." Standing there in the foyer of the house where I'd grown up, my suitcase in hand and my parents' words echoing in my ears, I realized that everything I'd believed about family love was a lie. Their love had always been conditional, based on my ability to reflect their values and enhance their image. The moment I stopped being useful to their narrative, I became disposable. I was 23 years old, 3 months pregnant with twins, and completely alone. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I had no idea that I was carrying the heirs to a billion-dollar empire, or that the man my parents had driven me away from would spend the next 6 months searching for me. All I knew was that the family I'd spent my entire life trying to please had thrown me away like garbage, and I was about to find out what it really meant to survive on my own. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed through my bones. In that moment, standing on the sidewalk with everything I owned in 2 suitcases, I had no idea that my real life was just beginning. The first month after being thrown out was the darkest period of my life. I lived in a cheap motel on the outskirts of Chicago, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument from neighboring rooms. My savings from summer internships were dwindling fast, and morning sickness hit me like a freight train every single day. I spent most nights crying myself to sleep, replaying every harsh word my parents had said, wondering if they were right about everything. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I was an embarrassment. Maybe I deserved this isolation. The shame was suffocating, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket that made it hard to breathe. I couldn't bring myself to contact Alexander. My parents' evidence of his infidelity played on repeat in my mind, mixed with my own wounded pride. How could I tell him about the pregnancy when I wasn't even sure if he'd been faithful? How could I burden him with babies he might not want? The questions spiraled endlessly, feeding my depression until some days I couldn't even get out of bed. The breaking point came at 16 weeks pregnant. I was at the free clinic for a routine checkup when severe cramping doubled me over in the waiting room. The nurse rushed me to the emergency room, where a harried doctor told me I was on the verge of losing both babies due to extreme stress. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high," she said, her voice cutting through my fog of despair. "The stress you're under could kill these children. You need to make some serious changes, or you're going to lose them." Lying in that hospital bed, alone and terrified, something shifted inside me. I placed my hands on my small bump and made a promise to my unborn children. I wouldn't let my parents' rejection destroy the family I was carrying. These babies deserved better than a mother who wallowed in shame and self-pity. They deserved a fighter. That night, I Googled narcissistic families and toxic parents for the first time. What I found shattered and liberated me simultaneously. Page after page described my exact experience. The conditional love, the impossible standards, the way they'd isolated me from anyone who threatened their control. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I was the victim of psychological manipulation that had been going on my entire life. I discovered support groups for estranged adult children, online communities where people shared stories that mirrored my own. For the first time since leaving home, I didn't feel alone. These strangers understood the guilt, the confusion, the way toxic families make you question your own reality. Dr. Chen, a therapist who specialized in family trauma, became my lifeline. During our first session, she said something that changed everything. Your parents didn't disown you because you got pregnant. They disowned you because you chose yourself over their control. That's what narcissistic parents do when they lose power. Through therapy, I learned about boundaries, about the difference between guilt and shame, about how my parents had trained me to believe their approval was essential for my survival. I learned that walking away from toxic family wasn't abandonment, it was self-preservation. The work was painful. I had to grieve the parents I'd thought I had, except that their love had always been conditional. Recognize that no amount of achievement would ever be enough for them, but with each session, I felt stronger, more grounded in my own truth. I started taking online business courses during my second trimester, focusing on digital marketing and consulting. My pre-med background gave me unique insights into healthcare communication, and I discovered I had a talent for helping medical practices connect with patients online. My first client was a small family practice that needed help with their social media presence. I charged them almost nothing, just desperate for something to put on my resume, but the results were immediate. Their patient engagement doubled within a month. Word spread, and soon other practices were reaching out. Working from my laptop in coffee shops and libraries, I built something that was entirely mine. No family pressure, no expectations of perfection. Just me learning and growing and creating value for people who appreciated my work. For the first time in my life, I felt truly capable. By my third trimester, I was earning enough to move into a small but clean apartment. I furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing each piece with intention. This wasn't the designer showcase my parents had raised me in. It was a real home, built with my own hands and my own money. The twins were born on a snowy February morning. Emma and Lucas Chen Martinez, perfect and healthy despite everything we'd been through. Holding them for the first time, I felt a love so fierce and protective it took my breath away. These children would never doubt their worth. They would never have to earn my affection. They were loved simply for existing. My chosen family surrounded us at the hospital. Dr. Chen brought flowers, my support group friends sent care packages, and Mrs. Rodriguez from the apartment next door offered to help with night feedings. These people barely knew me, but they showed up in ways my biological family never had. 3 months after the twins were born, everything changed again. My consulting business had grown beyond my wildest expectations, and Chicago Business Magazine wanted to feature me in their 30 Under 30 Entrepreneurs section. The article, titled From Med School to Marketing, How One Young Mom Built a Six-Figure Business, included photos of me with Emma and Lucas in our bright, cheerful apartment. I didn't think much about it until my phone started ringing off the hook the day after publication. Reporters wanted follow-up interviews, potential clients were flooding my email, and then there was a call that stopped my heart. Jennifer? Jennifer Martinez? Alexander's voice was exactly as I remembered it, warm and concerned and achingly familiar. I almost hung up, my finger hovering over the end call button, but something in his tone made me pause. "I've been looking for you everywhere," he said. "I saw the article, saw the babies." "Jennifer, why didn't you tell me?" The conversation that followed lasted 4 hours. He'd never cheated. The women in those photos were business partners, investors, his sister visiting from California. My parents' private investigator had deliberately misrepresented everything, creating a narrative that fit their agenda. "I tried to find you," he said, his voice breaking. "When you disappeared, I contacted your parents, your friends, everyone I could think of. Your father told me you'd decided I wasn't good enough for you, that you never wanted to see me again." The pieces clicked into place. My parents hadn't just thrown me out, they'd made sure Alexander couldn't find me, couldn't support me through the pregnancy. They'd orchestrated our separation, counting on my isolation to make me come crawling back to them on their terms. But I hadn't crawled back. I'd survived. I'd thrived. And now, looking at my beautiful children playing on the apartment floor while their father's voice filled the room with love and wonder, I realized that my parents' cruelty had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life, the chance to become who I was truly meant to be. Alexander came over that evening, meeting his children for the first time. Watching him hold Emma and Lucas, seeing the tears in his eyes as he whispered promises to them, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: hope for our future. "I want to be their father," he said simply. "I want to be your partner if you'll have me. I know we have a lot to work through, but Jennifer, I never stopped loving you." We took things slowly. Trust had to be rebuilt, stories had to be shared, wounds had to heal. But gradually, we became a family, not the perfect, polished kind my parents had demanded, but a real one built on honesty and mutual respect. My business continued growing. Alexander's connections in the tech world opened new doors, but I made sure every opportunity was earned on my own merits. By Emma and Lucas's first birthday, I was running a multi-six-figure consulting firm with a team of freelancers and a waiting list of clients. That's when the universe decided to deliver some poetic justice. My father's law firm was imploding. A high-profile case he'd been certain he'd win had backfired spectacularly, exposing some ethically questionable practices that dated back years. The Chicago Tribune ran a scathing exposé about his methods, and several clients filed complaints with the state bar. My mother's practice wasn't faring much better. A former colleague had gone public about the toxic work environment she'd created, and several nurses had filed workplace harassment claims. Social media was brutal. Patients shared stories about her cold bedside manner, her dismissive attitude toward families going through crisis. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they'd been busy destroying their own daughter for not meeting their impossible standards, their own professional facades were crumbling under scrutiny. The first contact attempt came through email, a brief, formal message from my mother asking if we could discuss recent events. No apology, no acknowledgement of how they'd treated me, just a vague request for conversation. I deleted it without responding. The calls started next. My father's number lighting up my phone at all hours, voicemails that began with "lawyer speak about family obligations" and mutual interests. I blocked the number. They tried reaching out through mutual acquaintances, asking distant relatives to intercede on their behalf. But word had gotten around about what they'd done to me. The same social circle that had once admired their perfect family was now gossiping about how they'd thrown out their pregnant daughter. 6 months into their professional downfall, they showed up at my apartment building. I was coming home from a client meeting when I saw them standing by the entrance, looking older and smaller than I remembered. My father's usually perfect hair was disheveled. My mother's designer clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes. "Jennifer," my mother said, stepping forward as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk." I stood there holding Emma while Lucas played in his stroller, my beautiful children completely unaware they were meeting their biological grandparents for the first time. The children my parents had rejected before they were born, the children they'd called a mistake and an embarrassment. "There's nothing to discuss," I said calmly. "You made your position clear when you threw me out." "We made a mistake," my father said, the words clearly difficult for him. "We were protecting you, but we went too far. We want to make things right." I almost laughed at the audacity. They weren't here because they'd realized they were wrong. They were here because their world was falling apart and they thought I might be able to help them rebuild it. "Make things right?" I repeated. "When I was homeless and pregnant, where were you? When I was building my business from nothing, Where was your support? When your grandchildren were born, where were you?" My mother's composure cracked slightly. "You have to understand, we thought we were doing what was best." "For who?" I interrupted. "Best for your reputation? Best for your image? Because it certainly wasn't best for me or your grandchildren." They stayed for an hour, making increasingly desperate offers. Financial support I no longer needed, connections I'd already built myself, a place in the family I'd outgrown. They spoke about forgiveness and second chances, but never once did they take genuine responsibility for their actions. As they finally prepared to leave, my father played his last card. "Jennifer, we're your parents. Doesn't that mean something to you?" I looked at Emma and Lucas, thought about the unconditional love I felt for them, the way I'd protect them from anyone who tried to hurt them. That's what parenthood meant to me. "Being a parent means more than DNA," I said quietly. "It means showing up, offering support, loving without conditions. You're not my parents. You're the people who gave birth to me and then abandoned me when I needed you most." They left that day looking defeated, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, just a profound sense of closure. The people I'd spent 23 years trying to please were strangers to me now. 6 months later, Alexander and I got married in a small ceremony at Lincoln Park, surrounded by our chosen family. Emma and Lucas toddled down the aisle as flower girl and ring bearer, their laughter filling the air with joy. Dr. Chen officiated, Mrs. Rodriguez made the cake, and my support group friends filled the seats that my biological family had vacated. My parents sent a card, a formal, impersonal thing that felt like a legal document rather than a wedding wish. I donated it to the trash without reading it twice. The twins are 3 now, bilingual and brilliant and completely secure in their parents' love. They know they have biological grandparents somewhere in the city, but they also know that sometimes people who share your blood don't deserve a place in your life. Alexander and I built something beautiful together. Not just our marriage, but an empire. His tech expertise combined with my business acumen created ventures that employ hundreds of people. We've established a foundation that helps estranged young adults build independent lives, offering scholarships and mentorship programs. Sometimes I drive past my childhood home, that museum of perfection where I learned to believe my worth was conditional. The for sale sign has been up for months. My parents couldn't maintain their lifestyle after their professional reputations crumbled. I feel no satisfaction in their downfall, but I feel no sympathy either. They made their choices the same way I made mine. The difference is that my choices led to growth, healing, and authentic love, while theirs led to isolation and the destruction of everything they claimed to value. The woman who left that house 3 years ago carrying nothing but suitcases and broken dreams is gone. In her place stands someone who knows her worth isn't tied to anyone else's approval, someone who built a life on her own terms, someone who understands that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's living so well that your past can't touch you. My children will never doubt their value. They'll never have to earn my love or walk on eggshells to maintain my approval. They'll know that family isn't about perfect appearances or social standing. It's about showing up for each other, especially when times get tough. That's the legacy I'm building, not with my parents' money or connections, but with my own hands and heart. And it's more valuable than anything they ever offered me.